The morning my brother called to tell me our father had died, I was sitting in a parking lot eating a sandwich for lunch. I remember staring at the bread in my hand and thinking I should feel something more dramatic than what I'd felt. My father and I had not been close in the way people use that word. We were not estranged. We talked on birthdays, on holidays. He came to my college graduation and shook my hand like I was someone he had just met at a conference. I left in the way you love, a landmark. Something fixed, permanent, part of the landscape you stop noticing until it's gone. He was gone now. I drove the 4 hours to my hometown with the radio off. My brother, Derek, was already at the house when I arrived. He was standing in the kitchen with his wife, Carla, and they were both holding coffee mugs and looking very comfortable, which struck me as strange. My father had been dead for 11 hours. They looked like they were hosting a dinner party. "There's a lot to sort out," Derek said, before I had even set my bag down. He was not wrong. Our father, Raymond, had spent 40 years building a small empire no one outside of the county had ever heard of. 4 storage facility locations, a commercial property on the edge of town he rented to a manufacturing company, and a controlling share in a regional logistics company that moved freight up and down the eastern seaboard. None of it was glamorous. All of it was worth money. Serious money, as I would come to understand in the weeks that followed. I was 31 years old. I had a job I liked well enough at a mid-sized accountant firm 2 states away. I had an apartment, a dog, a reasonable life. I had never thought much about what my father would leave behind because my father had never seemed like someone who was going to die. He was 70 years old and moved through the world like a man who had made a private arrangement with mortality and was not in any particular hurry. Derek was 38. He had worked for my father for most of his adult life, managing the storage facilities, handling vendors, doing the kind of operational work that keeps a business running without being the kind of work anyone writes articles about. He had married Carla 9 years ago. She was polite to me at Christmas and ignored me the rest of the year. The lawyer's name was Paul Eddington. My father had used him for 30 years. He was a quiet man with reading glasses he kept on a chain around his neck, and when he sat down with Derek and me in his office 6 days after the funeral, he set a manila folder on the desk between us and folded his hands on top of it. "Your father was very deliberate," Paul said. "He revised this document twice in the last 8 years. I want you both to know that he was of sound mind at every revision, and I can speak to that personally." He slid the folder open. The logistics company shares went to a charitable foundation my father had been quietly funding for 20 years. The commercial property would be sold, proceeds split equally between Derek and me. The storage facilities, all 4 locations, the equipment, the leases, the operational accounts went to me. I did not react the way I would have expected myself to react. I sat very still and looked at the paper and read the same paragraph 3 times. Derek made a sound beside me that I can only describe as the sound a person makes when they step on ice they thought was solid. "There has to be a mistake," he said. "There is no mistake," Paul said. "He worked there for 15 years, Carla said. She had come to the meeting uninvited. Paul had let her stay out of what I think was the particular discomfort of asking a grieving woman to leave a room. "I understand this may be unexpected," Paul said. "Unexpected." Derek repeated the word like he was testing whether it could hold any weight. It could not. He stood up. He looked at me. There was something in his expression I did not have a name for at the time. I have a name for it now. It was the look of a man who had already decided what came next. They left without saying anything else to me. I sat with Paul for another hour. He explained the transition process, the accounts, the context I would need to establish. He gave me a second folder with operational summaries my father had prepared. At the bottom of the folder was a handwritten note on my father's personal stationery. It said, "I know this is not what you expected. It is what I decided. The facilities need someone who hasn't been looking at them so long they've stopped seeing them. There are things there I never got around to explaining. You will find them. Dad." I read it twice. I put it back in the folder. I thanked Paul and drove to the storage facility on Haverford Road, which was the largest of the 4, and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, looking at the building like it was a letter written in a language I was still learning. The next 3 weeks were the most disorienting of my life. I gave notice at my job, which my boss took better than I expected. I moved my belongings into my father's house, which was strange in a way I could not fully articulate, sleeping in a childhood room that had been converted into a guest room, using a coffee maker that was not mine, walking through hallways lined with photographs of a family that felt, at that particular moment, like someone else's. My dog, a 4-year-old shepherd mix named Charlie, seemed to adapt faster than I did. He claimed the living room couch on the first day and never reconsidered. Derek called me on a Tuesday, about 2 weeks after the lawyers' meeting. He was calmer than I expected. "I've been thinking," he said. "You don't know these businesses. You've never managed anything like this. I spent 15 years building these facilities into what they are." "I know you did," I said. "Then you know it doesn't make sense for you to walk in and take over. I'm not trying to fight you, Ryan. I'm saying there's a practical reality here. What if we structured something where I continue running operations and we split the revenue?" "I'm going to take some time to learn the business first," I said. "Then we can talk about what roles make sense." There was a pause on the line. "Dad should have talked to both of us before he made this decision," Derek said. "Maybe," I said, "but he didn't." The call ended politely. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while after. There was something in the rhythm of the conversation that felt rehearsed, like he had written notes beforehand and was working through them in order. I filed that feeling away and did not know what to do with it yet. I started spending time at the facilities, all 4 of them. I introduced myself to the staff, most of whom had worked there for years and regarded me with the particular wariness of people who know that new ownership is almost always a prelude to change. I went through the accounts with the bookkeeper, a precise woman named Gloria who had been with my father for 12 years, and treated the financial records with the same protectiveness a librarian reserves for a rare first edition. At the Haverford location, I found something I was not expecting. I had been going through a file cabinet in the back office, the kind of physical cabinet that had not been touched in years, based on the resistance of the drawers, when I found a folder labeled simply with my name. Inside was a series of documents, contracts, amendment letters, correspondence between my father and a company called Meridian Storage Solutions. I did not recognize the name. I sat down on the floor of that back office, surrounded by filing cabinet drawers, and read through everything twice. Meridian was a regional competitor. 3 years ago, my father had been in early-stage conversations with them about a potential acquisition. They wanted to buy the Haverford facility specifically. The conversations had stopped abruptly, based on the correspondence, after a dispute about valuation, but there was something else in the folder. A series of emails, printed out and paper-clipped together between Meridian's acquisition director and someone with a private email address I did not recognize. The emails discussed operational details of the Haverford facility that were not public information. Lease terms, tenant volume, staff turnover patterns, infrastructure vulnerabilities. Someone had been feeding Meridian information from the inside. I closed the folder and held it on my lap for a moment. I thought about Derek's calm phone call. I thought about Carla's expression in Paul's office. I thought about my father's note. There are things there I never got around to explaining, and I understood with a clarity that felt cold and physical that my father had known. He had known someone close to him was providing information to a competitor, and he had not confronted it directly. He had redirected the inheritance, put the facilities in my hands, and left me a folder with my name on it in a filing cabinet he knew I would eventually open. I did not call Derek. I called Paul instead. "I need to know something," I said. "Did my father ever mention a company called Meridian Storage Solutions in relation to Derek?" There was a silence on the line. Then Paul said, "Your father came to me about 14 months ago with some concerns. He was not prepared to take formal action at the time. He asked me to hold some documentation on his behalf." "What kind of documentation?" "I think you should come to my office," Paul said. I went the next morning. Paul had a second folder, thicker than the one from the will reading, that my father had given him with instructions to share with me if I came asking about Meridian. Inside was everything. Bank records showing payments from a Meridian-linked LLC to a personal account. That personal account belonged to Carla, not Derek. Carla. I sat with that for a long time. It reframed everything I thought I understood about the situation. Derek's insistence that he had built the business, his anger about the inheritance, his calm, calculated phone call. Were any of those things actually about the business? Or was Derek simply a husband who had been kept informed enough to be loyal but not informed enough to be implicated? I did not know. I still do not know for certain. What I knew was that my father had uncovered financial impropriety, had chosen not to confront it directly, had restructured his estate to protect the business, and had left me the pieces to work with. The next call I received from Derek came 3 days later. It was not calm. "I need you to understand something," he said. There was a tightness in his voice I had not heard before. I have been patient. I have been reasonable. But there are things I know about those facilities that could seriously damage their value if they became public. I kept my voice even. What things? Compliance issues. Permit irregularities. Things that were handled quietly over the years in ways that wouldn't look good under scrutiny. I knew then that he was not reading from notes this time. This was different. This was a threat. I'd be careful about what you decide to do with that information, I said. I'm just being honest with you about the situation, he said. I appreciate your honesty, I said, and ended the call. That evening, I drove to the Haverford facility, let myself in through the back, and sat in my father's old office. I had been sitting in that chair often enough in the last few weeks that it had started to feel less like borrowing something and more like occupying a space that was being recalibrated toward me. Charlie was with me, sleeping under the desk. I could hear his breathing in the quiet. I thought about what Derek had said. Compliance issues. Permit irregularities. It was possible that there were genuine problems I had not yet uncovered. It was also possible that he was bluffing, using vague language to see if I would fold. And there was a third possibility, that there were real irregularities, documented and traceable, and that Carla's access to the inside information about the facilities had been the mechanism by which she had either created them or covered them up. I hired an independent compliance auditor the next week. I told Gloria what I was doing. She looked at me with an expression that suggested she had been waiting for someone to do exactly this for longer than she was willing to say out loud. The auditor's name was Dana Merritt. She was methodical and unsentimental and spent 3 weeks going through every permit, inspection record, and operational filing across all 4 facilities. She found 4 issues, minor in isolation, potentially significant in combination, that had been allowed to lapse or had been incorrectly documented over the previous 3 years. All 4 traced back to filings that had passed through Carla's hands during a period when Derek had briefly brought her in as an unofficial administrative consultant. Whether it was negligence or deliberate sabotage, I could not prove from the records alone. What I could prove was the pattern and what the pattern implied. I brought everything to an attorney. Not Paul, a different one. Someone who specialized in business litigation and spent a long afternoon laying out what I had. The attorney was quiet through most of it. At the end, she said, "You have a documented financial relationship between your sister-in-law and a competitor. You have compliance irregularities traceable to her period of involvement, and you have a written threat from your brother. That's a meaningful case." "What are my options?" I asked. She walked me through them. I could pursue civil action. I could report the compliance issues to the relevant regulatory bodies and allow the process to unfold on its own terms. I could also, she noted, simply contact Derek and Carla privately and present what I had found, which might resolve things without formal proceedings but would give them the opportunity to prepare a counter-narrative. I thought about my father. He had known about this for at least a year. He had not confronted it. I thought about that choice for a long time, trying to understand it. Eventually, I concluded that my father had not confronted it because he did not want to be in the room when Derek found out what Carla had done. He had loved his son. He had not known how to be the person who handed Derek that particular destruction. I was not my father. I called Derek and asked him to meet me at the Haverford facility. I told him to come alone. He arrived 20 minutes late, which I suspected was deliberate. He stood in the doorway of the office and looked at me sitting behind the desk. "You wanted to talk," he said. "I found the folder with my name on it," I said. "The one in the filing cabinet in the back. I also went to see Paul, and I hired a compliance auditor." Something shifted in Derek's face. Not guilt, exactly. More like the expression of a man who has been holding a particular version of events in his head and is watching it become unavailable. "I don't know what you think you found," he said. "I found bank records," I said. "Payments from a Meridian-linked account to an account belonging to Carla. I found emails between Carla and Meridian's acquisition director going back 3 years. I found 4 compliance filings with errors that traced directly to the period when Carla was involved in administration here." He did not say anything for a long moment. "I also have the voicemail you left me last week," I said. "The one where you mentioned compliance issues and permit irregularities. I've had that call noted by my attorney." "Ryan," he said. His voice had changed. The tightness was gone. What replaced it was something harder to categorize. Not remorse, but a kind of exhaustion. like a person who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and can feel that the moment of setting it down is arriving, whether they choose it or not. Did you know? I asked, about what she was doing. He looked at the window. Not at first, he said finally. I waited. She told me 2 years ago, he said. She said she had made a mistake, that Meridian had approached her, that the money had seemed like something that wouldn't matter to anyone, that she hadn't understood the implications. She said she had stopped. Had she? He looked back at me. I don't know. I believed that, at least. I believed that he had known and had chosen the explanation that allowed him to stay in his marriage and his life, and that he had spent 2 years understanding less than he could have, because understanding more would have cost him something he was not prepared to pay. I'm not going to pursue this in a way that destroys you, I said. But I need Carla to sign a statement of disclosure. I need the regulatory filings corrected with her name attached. And I need your written commitment that neither of you will have any role, formal or informal, in these businesses going forward. And if we don't, he said, then I give everything I have to the State Business Authority and the litigation attorney, and I let the process run its course, I said. And you should know that the process will be considerably less comfortable for Carla than what I'm offering. He left without giving me an answer. He called back 4 days later. Carla signed the disclosure statement. The regulatory filings were corrected. My attorney held the documentation in trust. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt something more like the specific exhaustion of the task that has been completed. Not pleasant, not unpleasant, simply done. I went home that evening, fed Charlie, heated something up from the refrigerator, and sat at the kitchen table in my father's house looking at the wallpaper he had chosen 30 years ago and never changed. I thought about the note he had left me. The facilities need someone who hasn't been looking at them so long they've stopped seeing them. I had understood that as a practical statement at first. I understood it differently now. He had not left me the business because he thought I was better suited to run it than Derek. He had left it to me because Derek, by the time my father was writing that note, had already compromised himself. Not through any dramatic act of betrayal, but through the slower, quieter choice of knowing something and deciding not to see it all the way through. My father had needed someone who would open the filing cabinet, who would call Paul, who would sit across from his brother and lay everything on the table without looking away. I had not known I was that person. I think my father had not been entirely sure either, but he had made a decision about probability, about who was more likely to do what needed to be done, and he had arranged things accordingly. 6 months later, the fourth storage facility, a smaller location that had been operating at a loss for 2 years, turned its first profitable quarter under a new management structure I had put in place after the compliance review. Gloria got a raise. I hired a full-time operations manager, a woman named Teresa who had come recommended by Dana the auditor, and who approached problems with the same unsentimental precision. Derek and I do not have a relationship right now. We have exchanged a few functional emails about the commercial property sale, which is still in process. I do not know what his life looks like. I find that I think about my father more than I think about Derek, and that feels right. I think about that note often. There are things there I never got around to explaining. You will find them. He was right. I found them. I found more than he probably knew I would find, or perhaps exactly as much as he suspected. With my father, it was always difficult to tell the difference between what he had planned and what he had simply left open, trusting that the right person would know what to do with it. I am learning, slowly, to be comfortable with not knowing which one it was. Charlie is asleep under the desk as I write this. The coffee is from a maker that is mine now, and a house that is mine now, in a life that has been rearranged so completely from what it was a year ago that I sometimes forget, for whole hours at a time, that it was ever any different. My father was not a sentimental man, but I think he loved me in the particular way that some fathers do. Not through the words they say, but through the weight of what they decide to leave in your hands. I'm trying to be worthy of that weight. I'm still learning. There is a version of this story where I am the villain, where I and the younger brother who showed up after the funeral and took everything a man had spent 15 years building. I have thought about that version. I think it is worth sitting with because the truth is rarely as clean as we want it to be when we are the ones telling it. But here is what I keep coming back to. My father was not a careless man. He did not make decisions accidentally. He spent 40 years building something real in a town most people drive through without stopping. And he did it through a quality of attention that I am only now beginning to understand. He watched, he noticed, and in the end, when the time came to decide what happened to everything he had built, he made a choice based on what he had seen. That is not luck. That is consequence. The choices Carla made, to take money from a competitor, to treat a family business like a resource she could quietly extract value from. Those choices did not disappear simply because no one confronted them immediately. They accumulated. They shaped what my father saw when he looked at the people around him, and they shaped what he decided to do about it. I think about that often when I consider what integrity actually costs in the short term versus what it returns over time. Carla's arrangement with Meridian probably felt at the moment she agreed to it like something small. A private transaction, money that wouldn't be missed. People rarely make catastrophic decisions in one dramatic moment. They make small compromises, one after another, until the accumulation of those compromises has become the architecture of who they are. By the time my father had assembled his folder and walked it to Paul's office, Carla had already built the case against herself. One quiet choice at a time. Derek's failure was different, and in some ways harder for me to understand. He chose to know less than he could have. That is its own kind of decision. Not dramatic, not malicious, but consequential in exactly the same way. The willingness to look away from something uncomfortable, to accept an explanation that is convenient rather than complete, does not protect you from the eventual reckoning. It only delays it, and it costs you, in the meantime, the clarity that would have let you make a different set of choices altogether. What I learned from Ryan, from myself, in the months of sitting in that office, opening filing cabinets, calling auditors, having conversations I would have preferred to avoid, is that intelligence without honesty is just a more sophisticated way of getting lost. I could have walked into those facilities and managed the surface of things. I could have avoided the filing cabinet. I could have taken Derek's offer of a revenue split and never asked any harder questions. I would have been comfortable for a while in a situation that was quietly rotting underneath me. The discipline of looking clearly at what is actually there, rather than what you would prefer to see, is not a comfortable habit. It does not make you popular. It does not make family dinners easier, but it is the only foundation on which anything real can be built. My father knew that. He built 4 businesses on it. And when the moment came, he trusted that I knew it too. I am still deciding whether he was right, but I am trying every day to be the kind of person who deserves to have been trusted with that question.